Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Aimee Baron from I Was Supposed to Have a Baby. And we are tonight going to be talking with Meria Albert, who is going to talk to us about her journey with third-party reproduction. She is a woman who has gone through, Meira, I see you. Guys, we figured it out for all of you. By the way, I know I'm like totally back and forth here, but for all of you, the problem was. The problem was on me because I forgot to tell Meira one crucial piece of this whole technological puzzle. Not her fault, totally my fault. So it's all good.
Thank
Anyway,
you.
Meira, welcome. Okay, so I was in the middle of just doing a little bit of introduction. So let me just continue with that, and then I'm gonna give you the floor. So, it is, we know in the Jewish fertility space that there are people who, part of the reason why these topics are not discussed, and by these topics, I mean third-party reproduction, is that there are definitely a variety of opinions within the Jewish world as to whether third-party reproduction, and like by definition, I'm just going to sort of lay it out there, third-party reproduction meaning using any kind of third party to be able to create a baby. And what that means is that could be an egg donor, that could be a sperm donor, that could be an embryo that gets donated, that could be a gestational carrier, meaning a surrogate. So these are any kind of third party. And so what we're talking about, what we're talking about is that in the Jewish community at large, there's a variety of opinions on third-party reproduction. And because there are a variety of opinions, it means that some people feel that it's okay, and some people think that it's not okay. And it is unusual to have someone who is willing to talk publicly about the fact that they've done that they've gone through these kinds of procedures, these kinds of processes in order to create their family. And when that person is able to talk about it and is willing to be open, it's for all of us to learn and to understand what actually goes on and what the thought processes are, what the family is thinking about, what the rabbis were thinking about. And also, it's a tiny, tiny, tiny window into the fact that if one person is doing it, I can tell you because I get the phone calls and I get the emails and the texts, and Meira knows because she gets them also. We're giving you a tiny window into what so many people in the Jewish community, and I'm going to even go further, so many people in the Jewish religious community are doing. And so now I'm finished. Meira, please introduce yourself. Just tell people a little bit who you are, and then,
Okay, thank you, Aimee.
We'll get right into your story.
Thank you for having me and for this platform that you've created. My name is Meria Albert. I live in Oakland, California, which is near San Francisco. And I've lived here for 8 years. And my husband and I are the rabbi and Rebbetzin at Beth Jacob of Oakland, which is a modern Orthodox Yeshiva University affiliated shul. And we have about 200 families here. And I am also a social worker, and I work for Hasidah, which is another Jewish nonprofit that helps financially and emotionally, spiritually Jews going through infertility. And I have Kanai 4 kids, 2 of which are naturally conceived without any assistance, and 2 who are conceived through egg donation. I found out while I was pregnant with, I guess I'll just start right in.
Right. So before you launch into this, I'm gonna actually take people back and tell them how we met. So we met because you reached out to me and you said, I have a story and I want to talk about it. So you know, and that was over the summer. We met for coffee, and it's taken all of this time, you know, mostly my fault, frankly, because my schedule is so crazy, um, to bring you here and to have you talk about your story. So, okay, just like take us back. So, you know, you met your husband, and I'm assuming genetic testing. There was some pre-genetic testing. Dory Sharm explained to people what that is.
Yeah.
Just walk us through just the initial like beginning pieces.
I went to Stern and Touro. My husband went to IU. I did genetic testing through Yeshiva University, so I think it was through like Montefiore or something at the time. But like the whole, like, I don't know, 200 whatever thing they did at the time before when I decided to start dating. So I wanted to get it all out, make sure I was okay. Nothing came back with a red flag. My husband did not go through any genetic testing at the time, and he did later on. Now, you know, thank God we met through friends, and we were pregnant with our first, with no trouble conceiving. And while I was getting my, you know, 1 or 2 checkups, whatever it was, within like the first month or 2, the doctor's like, oh, you know, there's a few other genetic tests I see that you've never been tested for. You know, it's just standard. Why don't we do that? You know, I'm taking your blood for something else, so let's do it. And I didn't think anything of it. Like, I've been taught, like, as you know, from a young age, like, science is important, and we do that, and we take care of our bodies. So I just, like, of course I'm going to trust my doctor. And then unfortunately, fortunately and unfortunately, and that is part of this whole genetic and science thing, is that I found out while I had a child growing in my womb that I have a pre-mutation for Fragile X. I'm not going to go into the whole detail of what that is, but essentially, just a tiny bit.
Give us
you may have
one
heard
sentence.
of Fragile X before. A big common thing that people know about is that it's related to autism, and a lot of other, there's a lot of other genetic anomalies and abnormalities. I myself am affected by it. It's a mutation of the gene, so it depends on how much your gene is mutated. I myself have symptoms, and I could potentially pass it on to my children. Worse symptoms or high functioning, and, you know, fine for me, but affected as well. But I could also have kids that didn't have it, and it was kind of 50-50 in some ways.
Right. So you get this news,
we do
and you're like,
right. So we consulted with a family friend, who's Rabbi Kenneth Brander, who was very involved with PUA, still is, in the infancy of PUA, and really knows a lot about the ins and outs of fertility and halacha. So we talked to him to see, you know, we had the option of doing an amniocentesis to see whether my daughter was affected or not. We found out at the time, around the same time, that we were having a girl. It's on the X chromosome, and so there's girls are generally less affected because they have 2. And so we decided, it was the agony. I was told halachically I could do it, but medically there is a risk to the baby. And so
just want to be clear, there's a risk to doing the
amniocentesis. The night before, I'm still, like, I haven't thought about this in a long time, but the night before, I was like, okay, I didn't know. I was just like, but I planned it. We had the appointment. The night before, I could not sleep. I was like agonizing, anxiety ridden, like just like sweating, and like, yeah. And just, I was like, I'm not going to do anything with it. I'm not aborting my child. So what am I? It's just knowledge. I'm not risking my unborn child's, you know, safety for some knowledge. And so I opted not to do it.
Not
Yeah.
to do it. Okay.
There are valid
Okay.
reasons to do it, and I support anyone that chooses to do it. But that was my choice. My husband left it to me. He's like, it's your body, you're carrying the child, you do it. Though he, you know, he was there and he was agonizing also, but I don't think he, you know, it was our first, and he didn't carry the child. He didn't feel as connected. Fast forward, I guess, but I guess at that time we did, you know, thank God, smooth pregnancy, smooth delivery. My daughter is now 8, and she likely has the pre-mutation like me, or even Fragile X. We decided not to test her until she's 18, when she can, or until she can make that informed decision herself, though we will recommend it to her. But we've decided not to test her because it wouldn't affect what she's doing right now. She has a lot of the symptoms that I have had when I was a kid, so likely she has it. But thank God it's pretty light. She's doing well. But at that time, I guess I'll start telling you a little bit about the next steps. My husband said, you know, I'm happy that we were able to get pregnant fast, and I'm so happy that we are going to have a child. But for future children, I want to do IVF with PGD testing, with genetic testing. And he flat out said, like, that's what. And he's not very strong about most things. Like, he's very just like lets me make decisions a lot of the time. But that was something he felt strongly about. Mainly because he worked at HASC for many, many years. And sure, that's
Explain
Hebrew
what
Academy
HASC is.
for Special Children. HASC, what I'm talking about is Camp HASC. And he was a counselor there for many years and took care of physical, emotional needs for children and adults with severe mental and physical disabilities. And he was there for a number of years, and he loved the work and felt very connected with those people, but felt like if he had the opportunity to not bring someone into the world suffering like that, he would rather not. So
Right. Okay. And so, and you, and I mean, and he said that, and you said
like,
yes,
so
assumingly,
esoteric
or
at the time.
was there?
I mean, it was because we were still pregnant. Like, we had like one conversation about it, and he was like, that's what I want to do. And I was like, okay. Like, it wasn't, I didn't think about it too much because I was so, you know, overwhelmed with what was happening at the time. Yeah.
Right. Right. Okay. So your daughter is born. She's healthy, thank God.
Yeah.
Take us, so
You know,
take us through, like, okay, so now
modern
you're
Orthodox,
thinking about your next child.
And, you know, after a year and a half or so, we're like, okay, you know, we're ready. We want to think about that. But that wasn't just like going off the pill this time. This was going to a fertility specialist. It took us a while. I would say 6, maybe 8 months after we decided we were ready. So that was like still a long time for us to just make that call to the fertility specialist. And we knew, as a rabbi in Rebbetzin, we knew plenty of people who had gone through infertility. So we knew what was, and I had friends, like, I knew what was somewhat in store for me. And so it made me scared, because it wasn't about not being able to have a child. It was about, I knew I would have to go through IVF. It wasn't like, I knew that it was going to be an uphill battle.
Right. Okay. So you finally, you know, get up the gumption, and
I got it from
a call,
a friend congregant. I got a recommendation in the area. Yeah.
Okay. And then walk us through
So
the
we
process.
go in.
Then what happens?
I realized pretty soon that they didn't really know my genetic issue. They weren't super familiar with it, which made me a little nervous. but they were like, they were honest about it. Like, this is not something, they were like, we've had one, maybe two clients, and it's a big, it's a big clinic in the area. And we go through all these tests that are just like the standard tests. And I already had known, I'm sorry, I'm going to backtrack. I had seen a genetic counselor, which is important for like anyone who hasn't been through this process. Once you get some kind of genetic abnormality, diagnosis, you're sent to a genetic counselor to teach you a little bit about it, though at the time they like really, to be honest, didn't know much about it. I ended up finding way more online than at the genetic counselor later on when I decided to research more. But it's still an ongoing genetic, there's ongoing research. So there's a lot unknown about it. Anyway, so I had found out at the genetic counselor while I was pregnant with my first that I possibly could have infertility. I could possibly, because it's a mutation, and the symptoms are not like you have it and these are your symptoms. It's you could have this, you could not have any of it. And so at the time, so that was like a few years before, I already knew that I could possibly end up having early ovarian insufficiency or early menopause in my 20s.
Wow.
It was not something
wow. Okay.
I like in 1 year out the other.
Gosh.
I didn't really register. Sorry.
1 second.
Yeah.
1 second. Lost the sound for a second.
It was
just
like in 1 year and out the other. I didn't really want to hear it, so I just kind of like really back in the like attic of my brain. But it's something. Yeah,
I mean, who would want to hear something like that? I mean, I'm sure anyone at that point is like, oh, that's not going to be me. It's going to be somebody else.
It could not be.
It's not
so of course you're like I was holding on to that, like could not be. Anyway, so once we went to the fertility doctor. I didn't like shop around or anything. We went to one that my friend recommended. That was where I went. Actually, I went to two, but that one, we decided with one. And we did like the regular testing that they do on how many, your follicles and everything, the AMH or whatever. I don't know all of the letters and everything. Yeah. And pretty much right away, that was like, the second consultation, they do the tests. They told me I did have early ovarian insufficiency. I had 1 to 2 eggs a cycle. And my as opposed to 8, 10 right. more. I was in my mid-20s. So I had the doctor described it as I have the amount of eggs as a 40-year-old in my mid-20s. And the doctor was trying to be as positive as possible, saying that my eggs themselves were super healthy. That was the way they spun it at the time. And then they said, it could be that, you're going to respond really well to the stimulation medication, which the stimulation medication can often help some weak eggs or like eggs that would not necessarily get so ready in each cycle. It can help it's not going to cause more eggs to happen or drop, but it will like it will right. It helps some of those younger eggs come out or whatever it is. Yes, that's the word I was looking for.
Correct.
And yeah.
Okay, so I'm guessing that they put you through a cycle or two to see how you would respond. Is that then what happens?
This is unlikely. It's going to take a miracle. That was what they told me, because I had to go through genetic testing on these embryos, right? So you're very familiar, and I'm sure some of the listeners are, on the drop of how many eggs actually end up going to embryos, right? It was extremely unlikely that I would end up with any to get to PGT testing. And with the test, right, it was unlikely I would actually have enough to go to testing. Then it was unlikely that any would survive the testing. But yeah.
Right. Okay.
Sure.
Yeah. So I
Thank
just want to
you.
explain that for people who are not familiar. Normally, I shouldn't say normally. Let me take that back. Typically, in a cycle, when someone is a average responder, and I'm going to use average numbers, and I don't even know if these numbers are right, but I'm just going to use average numbers just to make the point here. Let's say in someone who has regular average numbers and their hormones look good and their egg quality looks good and their reserve looks good, when you do what they call this ovulation induction cycle, where you're trying to produce as many eggs as possible, you can get 10, 15, 20, that in that range of the number of eggs that you can extract from a cycle. Then what happens is you take all of those eggs and then you mix them together. This is obviously all done in the Petri dish, but you take them and you mix them all together with the sperm. And let's say if we started out with a number of 20, and then you mix them with the sperm, then let's say 15 of them become embryos. So you already have a certain amount that fall
less
off.
than that. It's often
Then once,
half.
correct.
Yeah.
It's usually less than that. It's probably about half. Let's call it actually probably right. A more typical number would be half. So let's say 10 of them become embryos. Then that's on day 0 when they're actually fertilized. Then what happens is that they need to grow in the lab for a certain number of days before they're even taken out to be tested. And so they're watched every single day. Are those embryos growing or are they not growing? And so they're watched on day 1, they're watched on day 2, they're watched on day 3. By the time they get to day 3, there's there's a fall off in terms of the number that made it to day 3. So let's say if we started out, we had 10 embryos, let's call it maybe 4, 5, 6, make it to day 3. And then what Meira is saying, and what a lot of places are doing now, in fact, like every time I hear from people, the IVF clinics are pushing people into doing genetic testing. Not everywhere, but many of them are. Then on day 3, usually, but sometimes it's day 5, then those embryos are taken and a couple of cells are extracted from that embryo and they're sent out to a lab to be tested genetically. To see whether they have the typical number of chromosomes or not, and to see whether they're healthy, having nothing actually to do with what Meira is talking about right now. So from that point, so let's say we had,
because this is actually part of the story that I think is important for people to hear. We were told this is that a separate lab would have to create a pipette that was made of our DNA. It's because the embryos are so tiny. They need actually for it not to be disrupted, like they needed an embryo to the pipette to be made. It's amazing. It's amazing science. It really truly is amazing science. It's also extremely expensive on top of everything else. It also takes 6 months, up to 6 months to create. It required my parents' DNA. It required our DNA. It was pretty. I mean, it was like just a swab. It wasn't a big deal, but it wasn't intense. It was, and it was kind of like a shot in the dark, which I don't like that phrase, but yes. And we decided to do it. Like our doctor told us, literally, the doctor said it will take a miracle for this to work. I don't think it's going to work, but you can try it. Go ahead. And we consulted with more than one rabbi at that time, more than one doctor that, in our circle. And I am a pessimist by nature. And when I heard it's going to take a miracle from a medical doctor, I was like, it's not going to work. I'm going to do this because my husband really wanted this for me. And he wanted this for us.
Meaning, and
Yeah.
I'm gonna then I'm gonna push you here. He meaning
He
that
wanted
he wanted
both of us
he
to
wanted
have genetic connection to our future children. He wanted that, just like, plan A. And this was not plan
right.
A, it was plan B already, but he wanted at least plan B to be as close to plan A as possible. That's how I do the plan A's and B's stuff.
Totally. And was egg
Thank you for
donation
bringing it up.
tossed out
Exactly
at that point, or was it not tossed out until?
Yes.
Okay, or was it not tossed
in
out
that
until
same
later?
conversation, when the doctor told me it's going to take a miracle, these are, I said, because my brain was like, it's going to take a miracle. It's probably not going to happen. What are my other options? I asked that. My husband didn't want to hear it because he's an optimist, but I wanted to hear it. So it was like a very quick, like A, B, C, these are your options: egg donation, embryo donation, adoption. Those are your options. And we didn't go into the details. They were like, we'll talk about it if this doesn't work, since you decided. And the doctor told me, I'll do 2 back-to-back cycles with no break. So perhaps the first one, some of the medication will still be in your body and your hormones will be higher. So maybe it'll help get more.
Okay, so the plan was, those other options were tossed out. You heard them, but the plan was, we're going to move forward. We're going to try to get any embryos we possibly can from our own genetic material that would be genetically healthy, and not have this specific
that
issue.
Also actually
so
brings up another point. Because it's a mutation, we had a lot of possible decisions to be made. It was not that you're a carrier or you're not, you have it or you're not. It was, how many repeats does it have? Does it have a low number? Is it a female, and is it just a low number? So maybe you want to have that baby. Maybe you don't want to have that baby. It gets really tricky. And it goes into the moral and ethic part of this piece. Sure.
Right. So let me, I'm just going to explain, a little bit more here for the non-medical people. When we talk about genetic testing, and let's call it the classic, like Tay-Sachs, for example, that Ashkenazi Jews have. Tay-Sachs, as I was supposed to have a baby, we're going to have a separate conversation at some point in the future, talking about genetic disorders, talking about IVF for genetic reasons in a more concerted way and a more detailed way. We're really glossing over a lot of these pieces now to get to some of the egg donation pieces, which we are going to get to in a second. But just by way of explanation, so Tay-Sachs is an autosomal recessive. Oh God, I can't believe I can't believe as a doctor I'm saying this, but okay, someone please correct me if I'm wrong. Tay-Sachs is an autosomal recessive disorder, which means that when you look at the genetic squares, it means that 1 out of 4 times the baby will have a problem. 3 out of 4 times the baby will not have a problem. And so the question becomes for parents, when embryos are created with their own genetic material, they can then, the embryologist can pick out the ones that are perfect genetically. And because it's either you are carrying the gene or you are not carrying the gene. What Meira is talking about in her specific situation is it's not about whether she had the gene or whether she didn't have the gene. It's what's something that's even more detailed. It's a finer issue in genetics called this pre-mutation, which is where you see a number of different repeats. We see different, let me see if I can explain this better. When you see basically as you're mapping out the different genes in someone's in someone's chromosomes, DNA chromosomes. Basically, what you see is you see certain number of repeats that automatically translate into a certain kind of expression of an illness. And the more repeats you have, the more then that someone would express the illness, and the fewer repeats you have, then the less likely they'll have fewer of that expression.
It's a possibility.
So to speak. Correct.
It's
Correct. Meaning we're talking, as she explains beautifully, this is an area of genetics that we don't really 100% understand, and we're using, a lot of times what we're using is best guesses to, and it brings up exactly what you said, these questions of ethics, of morality, of eugenetics, right? Of choosing like the best, but we're doing this because we want healthy babies and we don't want to carry on these genes, and we want to give our children the best chances at life. And so these are heart-wrenching decisions for any parent, and I don't envy you.
It brings up a good point
to have gone through
that I kind of glossed over. I did mention why my husband wanted to do it. I didn't talk about then when I had some agony. I felt like I was betraying a non-existent child that would have a full mutation of Fragile X. I felt like I was like rejecting a child I never actually had and may never have, but I felt like I was rejecting it. And so I did have a lot of feelings about going through IVF with genetic testing. And just that decision that I was making was deciding that I wasn't okay having a child, or we weren't okay having a child with genetic abnormalities. And I finally made the decision to do it with the understanding that if I potentially would have a miracle child, and they did end up having the genetic abnormalities, I would love that child to death. I would do everything for that child.
Of course.
But because I was given the opportunity to not bring that, to choose not to have, to create that in the world, and someone who would suffer a lot and not necessarily not be able to engage with the world in a meaningful way, I decided, but it still honestly was not black and white, and it's not orange. It's not like you decide something like that. I've spoken to many women about this. There are many times throughout your fertility journey and building your family where you're making decisions that you're picking the option with the least regrets, or the option that you're gonna be able to live with, versus yes or no, right or wrong.
Right. I think you're reminding me of a discussion that my husband and I had when many of the people here know my story, and we actually there are places that are on our podcast where I've spoken about my story, but one of after I had 4 second trimester losses, and we took a very long break, and I had at that point decided basically that we were never going to try again, that it was too much, and I was was too emotionally overwhelmed. After about a year or two of that, I finally kind of said, I think we need to try this again and try one more time and see, because we never got any answers as to why I kept miscarrying. I had 3 healthy babies already. But at that point I was 39, and we looked at I looked at my husband, he looked at me, and we said, well, what if we try again and that baby has a genetic mutation? What happens if that baby is a Downs baby? What happens if that baby is a trisomy this or I'm old already. Like, it's a possibility, and we have to think about that, right? And so you're right, that I'm sure every couple goes through exactly these kinds of decision trees in their head. are we trying again? Are we not trying again? Are we doing this? Are we not doing this?
Not
And
easy.
they're
Yeah.
not easy. Not easy choices. Not easy.
So yeah. Can you
Okay.
redirect me, please?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, please. Okay. So you made the decision to try using, both of your genetic material,
Didn't work.
2 cycles in a
Nothing.
row. What happens?
Besides
Okay.
my body reacting horribly to medications, really just a horrible time that I don't want to revisit. And my husband devastated because it was a real loss for him. I was like, didn't think it. I mean, I was hurt. I was sad, but I was like pumped up on so much, and honestly, had expected it not to work. But lots of money down the drain, lots of time, lots of emotions. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So, then the options on the table were,
Adoption.
egg donation, embryo
Adoption.
donation,
Right. So,
adoption.
yeah.
So talk to us now about how you came to the next decision, who you spoke to, what were the halachic, the Jewish law considerations, how you got comfortable with them.
So
give us a little bit into
Rabbi
that piece.
Already. We consulted with him again, and we spoke. I think we really tried to keep it narrowed down and not speak to too many people, in terms of like who we were going to go by, right? But he's knowledgeable in all of the different opinions. I am in no way halachic decisive, and I'm not, telling anyone. It is complicated, and there are different options. There are different halachic options. What we were told, we had 2 options. If we were going to go through with egg donation or embryo donation, it applies to both. We had one option to go with a non-Jewish donor and have a suffix conversion, a suffix gerut of the child, a tinok, so a doubtful conversion. So it is possible that Jewish maternal line, the Jewish maternal line comes from the carrier, but it is also possible that it comes from the donor. And that also touches upon surrogacy. I'm not going to go into, this is not, I'm not a halakha.
Yep. No.
So that was one option.
I'm not asking
Another
you
option
to,
was for us to go with a Jewish donor who was not halachically married, was not married according to Jewish law, which meant that she could be married to a non-Jew, which gives you a bit of a larger pool of people. So she had to be halachically Jewish by birth, but could, I maybe even converted, but like that's a little bit iffy. But not married halachically. Okay. So
okay. And this is, again, this is not, we're not getting into the halachos here. We had, as I think I mentioned previously in this, it doesn't matter. We had a discussion with Rabbi Elon Siegelman a number of months ago that went into detail. It was a 90-minute discussion all about the different aspects of Jewish law. Correct. Different aspects of Jewish law, all in regard to third-party reproduction. We'll put that in the notes for this and also in the show notes for this when this goes
those
up
were our
podcast,
2
so
options given to us. We were told that, you know, he would, like Rabbi Brander would signed off on those 2 options. Now I'm modern Orthodox, we're living a modern Orthodox lifestyle. We were not looking for like haskamot. We were not looking for mashkiachim, like to like, but we were looking to make sure that our children would be recognized and backed up, Jewish, to be Jewish with by everyone, hopefully. But there's still a doubt. I mean, there's still the, like, even though I carried them and and they are from a Jewish, so we decided to go with the Jewish donor who wasn't halachically married, because I felt like, I'm thinking of marriage. I'm thinking that's pretty much the big, piece of when it's going to come into question. And I wanted them to be able to marry Kohanim, women to marry Kohanim, because they were born Jewish, and I didn't want them to go through that. I would rather the piece of needing to make sure that they're not genetic siblings and halachic siblings. So that is a piece, and that whoever they marry, the family that they marry into completely accepts them for who they are and where they came from.
Right. And did you, so now I'm going to ask more of a mundane question. As you were beyond the halachic of, whether someone was Jewish or not Jewish and whatever, was important to you what the person looked like? Like, did you try to match, someone who looked like you, looked like your husband, or had your husband's background or your background?
Yeah.
Like, what was
Sure.
that piece like for you, the choosing?
I'll answer that, and then I want to backtrack for something else also. What was important for me was not what they looked like at all. I chose not to see pictures. There's an option, it's the agency we went through, to not see pictures, but see like all the genetic and other information. So I didn't want to see pictures. I wanted to be the least connected, like recognizable connected with that person. And I wanted to have a feel of that person and like their family and their personality, of possibly like my children will be just sharing some of their nature, right? And so, I mean, it would be different because, children are different than their parents, and, it would be some of my husband's DNA, so it would be different, but I wanted to like feel connected with that person on a metaphysical way, a spiritual way, to be honest. And so I really went through their description of them and their family. Like they wrote like a bio about themselves and like their hobbies and all these different things. And there was so my husband, the way that we did it was that I had a little bit more time on my hands at the time than my husband, and I'm more opinionated, so I got first dibs. I looked through the whole registry. I made a whole spreadsheet of like different things that we decided together what was important to us, and then rated them, and like said, this is I think I did like 4 people or something. I narrowed it down to 4 out of whatever it was at the time, and I rated them, and I said which one was my first choice, based on personality. Yeah. Can I backtrack?
Right.
Yes, I wanted to backtrack.
Okay, so you wanted to go back to
something we talked about, and I think is really important. Why did I choose egg donation? Why did we go through, right? We talked that I had 3 options. I had egg, embryo donation, or adoption. I personally would have gone through adoption. Did not. I went through 2 IVFs back to back, and as I said, had a really horrible reaction to it, and I didn't feel a need. I didn't feel a need to do this again. I actually had a child. I was so fortunate to have been able to carry a child already. I didn't feel like I was missing that again. I didn't love pregnancy. And I felt like, let's give a family to people who didn't have children that didn't have it. I was ready to adopt an older kid. I was totally fine with that. If anything, like I idealized it in some way. My husband really wanted a boy to name after his father, who had passed away at a very young age. And it was like really, really important to him. And he made it clear. And again, as I said, my husband doesn't have too many things that he cares about, like to that extent that he'll put his foot down. And he was like really he wasn't gonna like make me do anything, but he made it clear that he
Right.
really wanted a son. And going through all of this, we may not have a son anyways, but there was more of a possibility that we would have a baby that shared his father's genes that we could name after. And that was really important to him.
Got it. Got it.
I did it for
Got it.
I did it for my husband.
Okay, so
Yeah.
okay. And we that's what being part of a couple is, right? We make compromises for each other. We do things,
and I never
because they're
resented
important
my
to the other
husband
person.
for the
So
choice I made
absolutely.
any of the time. And I had a loss after. I didn't resent my husband. Of course, I was upset with the situation, but I never, once I made that decision, that was that.
Did you have an option in terms of having an open policy with the egg donor? Did you want that
So we went
for you
through
or
a
for
Jewish
your
blessing,
children?
which is a company, you know, Judy, and it's a wonderful company, works as a nonprofit, but they're not an actual nonprofit, but they're just so special people. They're such special people, really care about their clients as well as their donors and their surrogates. And we got connected with her, I think through Yesh Tikva, maybe someone, and instantly knew that we were going to go through her. Pretty much, we looked through like the frozen eggs, but it was difficult to find the Jewish situation. It was very difficult to figure that out. So there's a lot of halachic pieces to this, and as I said before, we want to make sure that our children do not marry their halachic or genetic siblings. And
someone also was asking, and I'll just, if you can spend a little bit on this, how did
so
you
that's it,
verify that they
so
were
that's what I'm going to talk about
Jewish?
now. A Jewish blessing is one of the only companies that guarantee, like, even if they close down, Judy will hold it and she will pass it on to someone who is trustworthy. She has all that information. She has all the information of all of her donors and their children, the children they have themselves, and any eggs or embryos that have been used and been donated to other people, as well as any other children through like half sibling, like all pretty much anything. We're putting a lot of trust in her. We also signed, everyone signed, law. Law. Thank you. All of those things,
non-disclosures or
but we
disclosures,
are
or
putting a lot of
right.
trust in Judy, to be honest. They're not. She gives no information to you until you need it. So the way that it works with her is that once my child, please God, is ready to get married and has either a shidduch or like is dating someone, we give her the sex and the birthday of that person, and she'll be able to tell us if they're not
make sure that they're not genetically
yeah.
connected to your child. Okay. Look,
Sorry.
I hear in the background. I am so grateful to you. No, please. I just want to acknowledge the fact that you are taking time out of your, dinner, bath, bedtime situation to do this. So I want to be mindful of time and just ask you one or two more questions, and then, because you've been so generous already. Can you give us walk us through the end of the story? You made the decision for the egg donation. I mean, I know because in your bio, I know you have 4 children. Tell us where
I already mentioned I have one child, that my first is natural conception. I ended up, once we got our match and we had embryos, a funny story, I actually met the husband. I was in the waiting room with her husband. I figured out that it was supposed to be completely anonymous. I never met her, but I did kind of meet her husband by accident.
We won't tell anyone, don't worry.
I only figured it out because I put two, pieces together. Anyways, and I, and she wrote me a sweet letter. She didn't have to. It was really, really sweet beforehand. She wrote me a sweet letter. I wrote her a letter back. It was like really, really sweet. And we had like, random numbers to call each other. So, but it was really, really sweet. So like we have non-disclosure. She, at 18, she did sign something, but at 18, my kids could contact her, but she could also still refuse at that time. So it is a closed donation. And
okay.
Oh, sorry, I lost my train of thought. So yeah, we had embryos. We have a bunch. I can't remember how many, maybe 7 at the end. We decided not to go through genetic testing. I was like, you know what? Both, neither of them had my husband and the donor did not have any issues. So no. I ended up having the first transfer didn't take. Is it possible because I didn't go through that genetic testing, was it not as strong? Possibly, but I didn't think that the doctor was like, it's for sure gonna work. Like you have a young, perfect, already proven that it works womb. Like it's going to work, and you have this, a donor who's had her own children before. Like of course. We did choose also like a donor who was on the older side for giving donation, but who had never donated before. She only had her own children, so it was kind of like narrowing the halachic and genetic sibling issue. It was kind of strategic on my part. Yes. Anyways,
clearly.
So I was like, yeah, of course. So that loss was the most devastating of all my losses. I was like unconsolable for a while. Was not as my husband had already gone through a lot of his mourning. That was my time to mourn because I just assumed it would work, and I went through all of that. And the doctors were like, of course it's gonna work. There was like, it's like that bravado that doctors often have. Sorry, Aimee, I know you're a doctor.
It's totally fine. Totally fine. I don't actually practice medicine anymore.
You have to. Anyways, or maybe you don't, and they do anyways.
It's all good. It's all good.
Yeah,
I'm in the business of not guaranteeing people. I was going to say I'm in the business right now of not guaranteeing people anything.
Both sides of the coin.
So I'm taking back all of the things that I might have said.
And you've been on the other receiving end. Anyway, so yeah, the first one didn't work. I said to myself, I've gone through all this medication. I've gone through all these like hoops and blah, blah, blah. And this was like plan DEF or something. Not what I wanted to do. Thank God I had a child, though I really wanted her to have a sibling. She was already 3 at the time. She wanted a sibling. Her friends were having siblings. And so I said, this is my last one. I'm never doing this again. And so I put 2 embryos in. I said, I'd rather that chance, like the probability of us having both of them working and having twins than the probability of us not having anything. And thank God we were blessed with twins. Both of them worked. And we were actually in New Jersey visiting in the summer or it was winter. I don't know. We were in New Jersey. I had friends, the clinic. It's like a super popular one, Dr. Levine in Jersey. He's friends with my parents. So we were able to get an appointment so that we could see our embryos for the first time that were implanted and successful. But it could have been a devastating appointment, though we had blood tests indicating likely that we were pregnant and even likely that we were having twins, but it's still But that was amazing. But we weren't even actually in our clinic. But that I'm getting chills because I still remember it. I'm like smiling ear to ear. And that was God. I mean, I had a healthy pregnancy with twins. I was super blessed. I definitely was racked with like the thoughts of, you know, am I going to love my children as much as I love my first? Am I going to, and like, I would answer my own question right away. I'd be like, of course. But still, like in the back of my mind, it worried me. It concerned me. And I didn't touch upon, you know, like the social aspect of everything, you know, and being rabbi and Rebbetzin, of everything being in the limelight and all of that. I didn't even touch upon that, but with egg donation, that also brings up a lot of other things. While I was going through it already, I decided that I was going to talk about it. I was going to be someone to teach others, because I wanted my children to grow up and have most of, if not all, the people that they interact with in their whole lives have no problem with them and where they came from. And so I want to create an Orthodox world where they can be like everybody else. Though I know that they come from an amazing gift, you know, but not everyone may see it that way. So I want to be able to reach as many people for my children. That's my main reason for talking. Another reason is for my children themselves to feel confident in where they come from. And then another piece is to help others.
Have you told, yeah. Let me fast forward and then come back. You had your twins, and then your next child happens.
Man plans and God laughs. We're actually pretty open about it, though we don't talk about it as much now that she's old, you know, she's here. But while I was pregnant with her, I was told I was going through menopause. Like I was perimenopause, had all the symptoms and like the proof that I had almost no eggs. But I was still on birth control. I was on a pill. But because I had twins and all of those fertility pumping, I ended up having like a window that I must have been extra fertile, like a little bit more fertile, and may have skipped a pill or two or something or not, and it still happened. So I was on the pill and I got pregnant. Yeah, so even though, you know, I do have this infertility situation and this possibility that I could get pregnant, but very unlikely. So I was still on a pill. I also have this genetic piece, like, yay, I got pregnant. Wait, it's a possibility that my child could be extremely affected. And that is like bittersweet. I didn't end up, you know, this story, I'll tell this, I've told it enough. I'm gonna have to go, but I've told it enough. Maybe we'll end on this like tantalizing thing. I didn't know I was pregnant until I was like 4 months, because I thought I was going through menopause, and all of the symptoms I had were menopausal symptoms. But I'm blessed with 2 children that share my genes, and 2 that don't, and I love them equally. And it's an amazing, chaotic situation, as you can hear in the background.
Yes, and we are going to let you go, Meira. Can people? 100%. I know the answer to this, but I'm asking it anyway.
100%.
If people want to reach out to you, can people reach out to you?
You can share my information, share my personal, just so that we get there. Yeah.
Okay, Meira,
thank you for this opportunity
so much for spending your dinner time, your bedtime, your all of the time. We are incredibly grateful to you. Go to your family.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay. Good night, everybody. Good night.